Hey, welcome back. My name's Justin. Today I want to do a video re-reviewing the DWE drum set 2 years after my original video. When I originally covered this, it was a brand new product from a company that had never made an electronic drum set before. And it was so unique. Wireless drums, metal cymbals only. It was basically a laptop dependent kind of system. It was such an interesting kit doing all these different things at the same time from a company, again, who had never done this before. And I gave it a positive review. But because it was so unique, that also made it very niche. Not everybody likes metal cymbals. Not everybody wants to live 99% of the time on a laptop with their drum set. Also, it had a few bugs. It could have used a few extra sounds. There are things like that that are always the case with first generation products. So I wanted to take a look at what it's like today. Now that they've had some time to enhance the product to make it better. This isn't a full generation upgrade from what they had previously, but it is different enough that it's worth a second look. But first, today's video is brought to you by eDrum Center. If you're shopping for an electronic drum set, go give eDrum Center a shot. They're a great electronic drum store based in Tennessee. They've also got a fantastic website. Because they just cover electronic drums, they can actually answer your questions and give you advice, and they have all the best brands and all the different accessories you'll need. Check them out with my discount link below and tell them that Justin sent you. Okay, so let's start off with the sizes of this drum set. The toms are 8x10, 9x12, and 14x16. The kick drum is 16x22, and the snare is 6.5x14. One of the first things that you notice when you unbox this kit is that these are heavy shells. I've unboxed a bunch of acoustic-looking electronic drums before, and this is the heaviest one that I've ever unboxed. And that's because these are 9-ply maple shells, so you're getting a high-end acoustic drum set and a high-end electronic drum set at the same time. Now, there is a very vocal group of people online that don't think any electronic drums should have high-end wood shells. Because you're buying an electronic drum set, not an acoustic drum set, it should just be there for the looks and nothing else. And normally I agree because, you want to keep the cost down. But if the drum set is going to be a flagship kit anyway, if it's already going to be an $8,000 or a $10,000 drum set, you might as well give the person spending that much money an extra feature, a fallback. You're not going to use this as an acoustic drum set every day, but having the ability to change it over to a nice high-end acoustic drum set and making the triggers easily removable, that's an extra selling point that this drum set has, but Roland or F-Note do not. The finish on this particular loaner drum set that DW let me borrow is laser blue metallic. Think of it as a metallic baby blue. They also sell a bunch of other finishes too. So I originally reviewed it with the Black Galaxy finish. There's Diamond Nebula, Marine Pearl, Black Cherry Metallic, Midnight Blue Metallic, Santos Rosewood Exotic. There's also Candy Blackburst over Curly Maple Exotic, which is technically discontinued, but you can still find it on a bunch of websites. And Sweetwater has a store exclusive called Piano Black Gloss. Now moving over to mesh heads, the snare drum has a 3-ply mesh head, the high toms are 2-ply mesh heads, and the floor tom is a 3-ply head. These are actually all Roland heads with the DW logo on them. I like that they've chosen this exact configuration because you get a lesser rebound on the floor tom and the snare drum, so you're not developing too much of a lazy hand if you play electronic drums exclusively, and then you get a springier, higher rebound on the high toms. On the toms, they actually have acoustic resonant heads, so to people around you, you're sort of hearing this. So they're ringing out a little bit acoustically. This is basically the same kind of strategy that Zildjian is using on their Zildjian Alchemy drum set. Now I asked the company, how come you're not using an acoustic resonant head on the snare drum, and you put like a 1-ply head or something there instead? And I'm told that they did that because it was messing with the trigger accuracy of the snare drum. That particular head and the overtones it was producing was messing with it. And on the snare, you really cannot afford any of that, so they just decided to go with a mesh. Now moving over to the kick drum, it's a different mesh head from everything else. This is a heavy vinyl head made by Remo for this kit specifically. It looks really interesting, It feels different, and it's fairly heavy. You're not getting a ton of rebound out of this. It's a combination of the head, but also the giant foam block behind it. Something odd about these mesh heads is the fact that half of them use metal rims and the other half use plastic ones. That's the snare and the high tom batter heads. This is because they use two different manufacturers for this drum set. The metal rim ones are made by Remo, and the plastic rim ones are made by whoever Roland uses on their drums. It shouldn't matter as long as the durability is fine, because the mesh that you're actually hitting is identical, but the rim choice is kind of weird. Now let's talk about the stands. Most music stores bundle in the DW5000 hardware pack. That's a good choice because I'd say this is a cut above what Roland and F-Note include with their kits. You get literally everything. There's a 2-leg hi-hat stand, which is great for getting out of the way of double pedals, and also 2 hi-hat rods for short and tall setups. There's a crash cymbal stand for, the 2 crashes with ball mounts for the high toms, a ride cymbal stand, a snare stand, and a DW5000 kick drum pedal. Yes, I know you probably already have a favorite kick drum pedal if you can afford a kit like this in the first place, but extras are always good to have. Absolutely everything here is incredibly heavy duty. Getting this box down a flight of stairs by yourself is not very fun. But I'm pretty sure this stuff will outlive anybody who buys it, so A+ on the hardware. This is as good as it gets. So now let's talk about the sensors inside the drums. You got a FSR sensor in the middle, and you have piezos on the edges. This is the same on the snare and the toms. The one difference the snare drum does have is a wire throw-off. It's a on-off kind of thing, and it's got a magnet, so it's almost like an AirPods case where it almost clicks into place. Moving down to the kick drum, there's a large block of foam to absorb the impact of you playing, and the sensor is the same one that is in the center of the toms on the snare drum. It's a FSR sensor, and it can sense pressure. But as of right now, the software is not doing anything with that data, and they don't have sample support for a separate choking or digging into the kick drum set of sounds. By the way, you're probably noticing that whenever I hit the drums in the videos, there's a little blue LED light that flashes. You can choose that to be on or off. For most people, I would probably turn it off after you do the initial setup. It's nice, it's comforting to see that the drum is actually working when you unbox the kit, because you're like, I've never set up a wireless drum set before. Does it even work? Are there batteries inside? And then you tap it and you see a little blue light flash. So that's kind of cool. But long term, if you want to just add just a tiny bit of extra battery life, you might just want to turn that off, and it'll look cleaner if it's not flashing. So now let's talk about zones. The cymbals are 2-zone for the hi-hats and 3-zone for everything else. So you're getting bow and edge on this. On the cymbals, the crashes have bell zones like usual on a Roland drum set, because these are taken from the flagship Roland VD716. But on this drum set, you actually can play the bell zones. On the Roland, you can't. Sometimes people want to know about cymbal swells, so here's what it's like. When it comes to drums, the kick drum is single zone. On the snare drum, you've got a bunch of different zones. So you have positional sensing support. It can detect sort of center zone and edge zone. Now before, the cross stick was working, but it was a little bit iffy. Sometimes you really had to dig in with your hand and put more pressure than I feel like you should have had to. But now with the latest updates, they've actually addressed this, and you can easily trigger a cross stick sound all over the place, no matter what hand you're using. And that doesn't hinder you from doing little edge taps. Now you'll notice that I'm also hearing sort of head zone hits. So I need to adjust that inside of the settings. The cool thing about the throw off is that you decide what that second instrument is. By default, it's snare wire off, but inside of the settings, you can have it be a whole second snare drum. So if you want to have a main deep snare and a secondary piccolo snare, you can do that. Now, the snare drum is in the mode that lets you get cross-stick and positional sensing, which makes the most sense for me. But the second kind of mode that you can put the drums in is pitch bending and palm muting. Some people may say, like, well, what's the point of being able to mute the drums? It's the same reason why you want to choke the cymbals. Have you ever been trying to record a drum cover or a drum thing for Instagram and you messed up and you just want to play again as soon as possible? What are you going to do? You're going to mute the cymbals, and you're also wanting to stop this freaking floor tom from ringing out so much because of the overtones of it. So for me, it's actually therapeutic to be able to mute the drum so I can do another take. And because there's no positional sensing sample changes from the center to the edge on the tom instruments, it makes sense to get pitch bending on this and also palm muting. Now, a question that I got about this snare drum from a Patreon supporter, and by the way, quick plug, I do have a 65 Drums Patreon page. If you want to see videos before anybody else and just a tiny little jot down of what maybe I'm working on next and that sort of thing, feel free to support the channel over on Patreon, link below. But anyway, he was asking, is the DWE snare drum better than the Roland digital snare? First of all, it has a snare throw-off, but it's a 3-in-1 design. So they're kind of taking the concept and one-upping DW. There's a built-in dial, so you can adjust manually exactly how much wire, like how tight it is against the head, or adjust that to do something else. Like you can use that to tune the snare up and down in real time. Roland also has the ability to detect shallow rim shots in addition to open rim shots. I've double checked and DW can't do that. And even if you use it with the V71 module, it still doesn't support that as detection. The Roland digital snare doesn't really require calibration as often. Sometimes you have to recalibrate the drums just by tapping the rim after pressing calibration. And the last advantage that I'll just touch on is the fact that it does positional sensing, not just from center to edge, but also in a 360 pi grid. The DWE snare drum still has some tricks up its sleeve that even Roland doesn't have yet, and is still a very, very solid option. But if we're being picky, and we should be picky if you're thinking about spending $8,000 to $10,000, if we're being picky, Roland does have a bit of a technological advantage. I wouldn't say it's night and day though. So now let's talk about noise levels. You can get this kit in a loud version or a quiet version. The rubber cymbals, they're definitely going to be quieter than metal cymbals, and they're quieter in two different ways. Literally, less decibels are coming off of the cymbal because it's made of rubber. But also, you perceive it as even quieter because this is a lower frequency sound than the higher frequency kind of tink-tink sound of hitting a piece of metal. So this means that getting the rubber cymbal version will cut through your headphones a lot less. You're not going to notice as much when you're playing through headphones. But also, if you're playing live with DWE, it's not going to be as apparent to the audience. And I like that they give you a choice. I haven't heard of them discontinuing the metal cymbal version, so it's still there if you prefer that, but this is now a decent option as well. When it comes to the drums, it's kind of a mix of different things. So the kick drum is significantly quieter than Roland's kick drum. The VAD 716 kick drum, that thing is loud. It's funny how Roland invented mesh heads and then turned around and started using a foam pad on their kick drums. They feel awesome, they're just loud, that's all I'm saying. When it comes to the toms though, the Roland toms and snare will be quieter than this because this does not come with rubber rims. You can technically go buy some rubber rims, like this is a rubber rim from my Roland PDX 100 pad, and it just so happens to match perfectly with the high tom here. And I tried it, and I found that the rim performance goes down drastically if you do this. They designed the settings and everything, assuming that you wouldn't use a rubber rim. So you can technically use these, but you probably shouldn't. I'm not making any definitive statements here because I wish I'd spent more time in the trigger settings forcing it to work, but I think it's fair to say that DW didn't design the trigger presets with rim silencers in mind. So overall, this is not the most silent electronic drum set of all time, but it's also significantly quieter than you might expect. And it's a big improvement on that sort of area versus the metal cymbal version. And speaking of which, we should probably just cover the cymbals now. So in the box, you're getting a VH10 for the hi-hat. This is a 2-zone, 1-piece hi-hat, and you're getting 3 Roland CY16 RTs. So you're getting 3 zones for the crashes, and you just choose one of them to be the ride cymbal. Now you might be wondering, why did they choose a 16-inch to be the ride and a 12-inch 1-piece hi-hat to be the hi-hat on this version of the kit? It's not because they didn't want to include higher-end, nicer pads. It's because the transmitters that make these analog pads work with the hub, this is what plugs into your module or your laptop, this transmitter can't support the power draw of the 18-inch digital ride or the 14-inch 2-piece digital hi-hats. Ideally, they should have and would have included those, but they couldn't. So they basically picked one tier down, so the highest-end analog version of those digital pads. And because Roland axed the VH13s a couple of years ago, they had to include the VH10, and because they don't make an analog 18-inch ride, they had to include the biggest cymbal that they had, which was analog. So those are the choices that resulted in the pads that you're seeing here. Do you feel the compromise? Yes. You can definitely feel that this is not a flagship hi-hat, and you're not getting a 20-inch ride like F-Note gives you, or an 18-inch ride, which is what Roland gives you. However, this is still my preferred way to play the kit. I understand it's a compromise, but still, this is better than the metal cymbal to me and what I want out of an electronic drum set. The wireless packs look like this. It's about the same size as one of those like in-ear monitor systems that you clip onto your belt when you're playing on stage, except you're plugging in cymbal pads. It has a mount that you can just slide in like this. It's pretty elegant, and you can even flip it around, so whatever orientation you need to connect it to your cymbal stand, and you just sort of mount it on the cymbal stand. Be aware, this is kind of a chunky boy, and so you need to have enough open space on a cymbal stand so that it actually fits and isn't bumping into a piece of metal jutting out. It's not quite flush against the stand, but it's close enough where it's a problem, and you got to sort of figure it out. And the included cables aren't very long, so you can't just like put it really low on the cymbal stand. And yes, the irony of having cables on a wireless drum set is not lost on me. Also, be ready to have at least 8 AA batteries. The drums apparently come with them pre-installed, but the WT10s do not. So you need to have 8 of them, make sure they're nice. Battery life, I'm told, will be about a year. There's also a battery indicator in the side of the software, so you're always aware of what's going on. If you don't feel like you need the bell zones on the crashes and you want to expand your drum set without spending more money on WT10 transmitters, just don't plug in the bell cable on either of these, and then you have an extra slot on both of those transmitters. You can plug in 2 extra cymbals without spending extra money on the infrastructure. I don't think the concept of the WT10 is very elegant, but the way they executed it is pretty elegant. There's not a single button on this. It's not like a Bluetooth headset. And this is not using Bluetooth technology at all, because that would be way too high latency. The whole drum set operates at 2.4 gigahertz, which is how it gets such low latency. And with the latest update, it also chooses the least crowded frequency band for you. Now, when it comes to the pairing process, it's going to come up as 2 PDX8 pads. It doesn't actually know what it is. So you have to right-click on one of those PDX8 pads and then manually tell it, this is a CY16 or this is a VH10. The drums know automatically. They have code inside it that tells it, this is a 14-inch snare, this is a 10-inch high tom, this is a 22-inch kick drum. But this is being plugged into analog pads, so it doesn't know what's plugged in. Okay, so now that I've talked about the drums and the cymbals, now let's talk about how you actually get sounds out of them and how all that works. So this is the DW hub, which I covered briefly earlier, but this is what all the drums and cymbals pair to. It's really tiny and it's incredibly lightweight. And you're not going to max this guy out. It can handle 30 drums and cymbals at the same time. You can plug this either into a laptop or you can plug it into a drum module. Even if you want to use this with a module, you still need to at least set this up on a laptop first, because every single drum and cymbal is technically a separate wireless device, and they have software updates. So you need to make sure that your snare is on the latest software update, and so are the cymbals, so that they all work at their best. And the way you actually hear the sounds is with this guy right here. This is a Roland Rubix audio interface. This is actually an upgrade. Originally, they gave you this, I think they called it the RTAP audio interface. So at some point, they switched over to this guy. This is a Roland audio interface, and they actually gave this to pre-existing customers too. So it has 2 inputs right here, which you can use to plug your phone into. And then you also have 4 direct outputs on the back, which you can route with inside of the settings. Now, if you don't want to be the laptop guy and you want to use this with a drum module, which may have stability and latency like advantages, you can plug this via USB-C into a Roland TD27, TD50X, or Roland V71 module. The advantage of using the USB connection to one of those 3 modules that supports it is that you can actually adjust the trigger settings of the drums in the module, and it will reflect on the pads. The second way that will make this work with a lot of other modules is using this little adapter cable. So the hub has a 1/8" MIDI connection that then goes to a 5-pin connection. And as long as you have a module that has MIDI in, this will be compatible with it. When you're doing the original setup of everything, you just tell the hub, hey, you're going to be used with a TD30. Here's all the MIDI notes for that. The downside of this method is that you can't adjust the trigger settings inside of the module and have it affect the drums. Anytime you want to adjust the sensitivity of the snare, for example, you'd have to plug it back into your computer, make those adjustments, and then plug it back into the module. You can technically run them side by side, but I'm assuming you don't have a computer next to your drum set if you're trying to be a module kind of person. It's important to be able to change the trigger settings in the module. And until that happened, this was a less appealing drum set to a bunch of potential customers, because not everybody wants to use a computer all the time when they're trying to play drums. Because number one, you have to buy a nice computer. Take a look at these recommendations on the DAW website. They're fairly high. Now, I asked them about this, and they said that, well, they kept the recommendations high because some people are going to use this inside of a DAW and then throw all kinds of effects and stuff and have lots of direct out channels and stuff. So if that's you, then you're going to need a computer capable of handling it. This particular laptop they lent me, though, is actually an Apple M2 laptop with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it's more than capable of running this. So you don't even need like the latest and greatest laptop, but the recommendations are still fairly high. And some people don't have a laptop capable of running this program, including me. I've got an old MacBook with an Intel processor, and it's not new enough to run this program. So they literally had to mail me a laptop to run it. So yeah, some people would rather be a module person. And now you are able to do that when you couldn't really do it as easily and as well back when the drum set originally launched. So next up, I want to do a brief run through of the software. This is not trying to be a tutorial because I know you did not sign up for that, but at least I'll let you know what's going on and what you can expect and the kind of capabilities that it has. So there are 2 separate programs. This is SoundWorks. This is what makes the sound, and you can change this out. You can use this with Superior Drummer, Easy Drummer, Steven Slate, Good Drums, whatever plugin that you want. Though not all plugins will have, all the eDrum settings you might want, so keep that in mind. And then over here, you have the second program, which is DWE Control. Think of DWE Control as the drum module portion, where you can adjust all the different trigger settings. And this is how you pair everything up. The pairing process is easy. All you have to do is press this pair button and then hit the drum, and automatically it pairs. Now, you have to calibrate it. Calibrating the drums is literally like you hit the rim. And on the hi-hat, you set up where the open and close range is, but it's not overly annoying. Once you pair everything up, and of course, you're going to have to right-click on the cymbals because they won't know they're cymbals yet. You have to tell them what the pad is. Now you have all your different trigger setting adjustments. You can press Edit to update the firmware. This lets you know what exact firmware that I'm on and the visual representation. And then over here, you have the velocity control. This is zone dependent. So you have a velocity control dependent for every single little aspect of it, including cross stick, which I like. You can either right-click and choose log 1, for example, or you can grab these handles and actually do that. The reason why it's flashing sync is that after you make these changes, you're going to want to hit the drum so it saves it to that memory. At least that's what I think is going on. Down here, you have your usual sensitivity threshold, retrigger, cancel, all that stuff, which either excites you or makes you bored. Over here, you got options. You can turn the light on or off, rim zone, rim shot zone, cross stick, pitch bending, which on the snare you can't use right now because it's in positional sensing and cross stick mode. Over here, you've got head and rim shot adjustments, positional sensing smoothness, rim shot, rim, cross stick, cancel, positional sensing range. And then over here in MIDI, you can tell it what MIDI channel, the notes, and also the instrument type. For the snare off, this is where you can tell it, hey, I want you to turn into a floor tom or whatever. I want you to be snare 2B. Out of the box, it is set to snare 1B, which I think is the default snare wire off note. Now, let's talk about Soundworks. They've done a bunch of upgrades and bug fixes since I last reviewed this. They got rid of the sort of like early 2000s core shiny metallic design, so it looks a little bit more modern. You can use a second remote hi-hat now. They've added the ability to change kits with a MIDI controller. So if you wanted to put like a secondary pedal on the ground and use the pedal on the ground to change kits, or have a dedicated pad to hit to change kits, I believe you can do that now. They've also recorded a bunch of sound expansions. They're expensive if you buy all of them, but you can just sort of listen to the sound examples on the website and pick the one that you want to expand to. The one that I like the least is probably the Lawrence Jr. I'm sure it was recorded really well, but it's not really what I personally want or need. There's also the Roland Classic Drum Machine Pack. This is a very tiny download, and it's just them sampling some of the legacy Roland drum sounds that you've heard everywhere. I don't think that it's worth the price, but I'm glad that they put it in the collection because it's one of those things that, it's good to have in there just for the sake of completeness. Moving over to Purple Heart, this is possibly my favorite of the expansions, especially with the snare wire off. It just sounds so freaking good. Let's see, the metal expansion, that's actually free. The key thing to know about it is that they don't have articulations for everything. So for example, the crashes are just edge zones. They don't have rim zones on the toms. There is no wire off samples. But for a metal context, they have all the zones I would particularly need. So it's really fun to play with. It sounds modern, it sounds punchy, and you can use it as a layering effect. So add it as a second layer for the snare drum to make it sound massive. You can do that. I asked somebody at the company, do you guys have like a Zildjian vault kind of situation where there's this dimly lit room deep in the bowels of DW headquarters where you have every snare you've ever made and you can bring them out one at a time and sample them for the sound expansion packs? And I was told, no, that is not what's actually happening. They're literally building the drums purposely to be sampled for these packs. Now, actually getting into the rest of the software so you can see what it can do, you got the avatar of the kit. It does not change from sound expansion pack to sound expansion pack. I've told them they really need to do that, and they agree. They're actually working on that, but they're not going to be able to change the avatar of the look until a later date. On the left, you have the mixer controls for the instrument that you've selected. Right now, it is the snare drum. This right here, this fader is just for the direct mics. That's something you wouldn't know just by like bumping around. You have to like watch the tutorial to learn some of these things. You're just turning down the direct mics on this. The actual master volume for the instrument is right here. And you also cannot double click to send this back to 0. You have to press Command and then click on it. I would love it if you could double click and actually go back to default. Anyway, you got your instruments, your direct mics, your overhead mics, and your ambience. And you can expand any of these to see all the different mics. So close room, mic room, far room, mono room. And you can solo mute them and flip them. And then you can see all the different collections of mics right here. If you hit a drum, you want to see what exactly is going on with it. And you go over here to Kit Designer, and then you press Info, you can see everything about it. They got an avatar of it. They tell you the size, the shell type, the model. They tell you all the mics. They used a Shure mic. They used a Barodynamic mic. And they tell you all this information, which I really like. It helps with the vibe, the experience of using the software. If you go over here to Mixer, so here are all the instruments. Here are some more instruments. Here are the X pads, which you can use for expanding or layering, your aux buses, and you have the sends. Right now, you can see everything is labeled that it's going to master output 1 and 2, which is on the interface. And that's how I recorded these drums. I decided to record the playing examples directly instead of like recording the MIDI and then exporting it, bouncing it. And that will hopefully give you a better representation by watching this video, what the drum set will sound like through your headphones or through a PA system. Something useful if you're trying to build out a kit of your own is to go over to Grooves and then just play one of these MIDI packs so that can play in the background. And then you go to Mixer and you can say, let me just solo the kick drum. And I want to be able to EQ it. So I'll press EQ and I can adjust these different settings here. And so that you don't have to constantly tap on the kick drum with your foot or a floor tom or a crash cymbal. The software can just play itself. And you can go about your business and adjust the sends, adjust the ambience, adjust the EQ and the dynamics and the reverb. They have all these different options for you to control the sound of it. There's enough here to get a pretty nice, well-mixed tone. And if you want to do anything further that the software is not capable of, you can just open this inside of a DAW. I like the fact that SoundWorks works as a standalone program. For the longest time, I thought this was a very clean, very controlled kind of sound to the plugin. Even if I go over here to ambience and I crank this, I'm hearing some extra ambience, but it's not really cutting through. And that's because you basically have to really bring down the direct mics and crank the ambience, either in this master fader or directly, in order to really hear the room. Until you do that, you're going to think that SoundWorks is this super controlled, super clean, radio-ready sound, but you're not really feeling like you're in the room. And that's just because of the way everything is pre-mixed. So now let's talk about this menu over here. One of the things about SoundWorks is that they tuck away really important things in areas you would not expect. So if you press this, you have 3 submenus. Let's start with playback options. You have the ability to adjust the snare buzz on the kick drum. That's a super important feature. And the pitch bend range. Obviously, it's grayed out on the kick drum. I tried it, it doesn't work. But on like Tom 1, if I want to hit a very specific note when I'm pitch bending on a high Tom 1, I can adjust that and I can achieve that. Another menu that's very useful is advanced mappings. So if you're feeling like the ride cymbal bell is not loud enough, you can just go find the ride and you can expand this and you can go find the bell zone and you can adjust the volume upward right there. You can also adjust the pitch of every single individual zone, which is useful. You can adjust how long the sample lasts. Out of the box, a lot of these things, they don't actually fade all the way out as long as the samples were actually recorded. So if you feel like the floor tom needs to ring out longer, you can just, go all the way to the max. The last little menu tucked away here that's worth mentioning is MIDI CC settings. So here, this is where you can adjust the different parts of the positional sensing on the snare. So you have center and edge with and without the snare wires. You can also take a look at this with the hi-hat, which is very important. So here, you can actually manually adjust the different layers, the different levels they recorded, the hi-hat open and closed. If you don't like exactly where this particular layer of open and close is lying, you can adjust it like this, And once you start moving it, you start bumping the others around like this. So just be aware, if you go too high or too low, you're going to consolidate every layer of open and closed like that. You also have your foot splash articulation here, close articulation, maximum delay, maximum level, all those types of things. Now going back to the main menu, you can expand beyond what you're seeing right here on screen. I think the max number of instruments this thing is capable of handling is 30. And if you want to design your own instruments, you can actually assign that to XPad 1. So go to Instrument Designer, and now you can import tons and tons of samples. You can create a round-robin snare drum out of tons of samples. The last thing I want to talk about is the set list feature. So let's say you want to play this DW drum set live, and you're going to run through 3 different kits depending on the song. Well, what you can do is just create a tiny little list of those 3 kits that you need, instead of manually running around with the mouse and trying to select them one at a time. For each kit that you add, you can choose if you want to have a metronome playing, and you can decide where the output of just the metronome goes so the audience doesn't hear it. So you select it right here. It's dependent on your audio interface, of course. So that is a brief overview of what this software does. Currently, I have a few wish list items. If I turn off the snare wire throw off on the physical snare drum, I would like the tom buzz to go away on the toms too. Another thing is, I would love to see the graphics change from kit to kit, especially if I'm changing sound packs. This software works perfectly fine right now. It is fairly polished, but it could use a redesign at some point in the future, especially because how many important menus are tucked away over here that you're not going to find unless you're looking really hard or watch a tutorial. Another thing is, I did have this crash my computer one time. It hasn't happened since, but it did happen once, so that's a bug that they should probably look into in the future. But overall, okay, I'm not going to complain too much because this is a very polished program. It's still relatively new compared to the other competition out there. Is it as good as Superior Drummer? Not quite yet, but it is very, very solid. Now, the bigger question about the software is who should actually be using it? I would say people who should use it are the people that have really high requirements for sound quality. If you want the absolute best, highest quality sounds, only software is going to give that to you. Yes, they do have DW expansions for the Roland V71, but because it has memory limitations, it's not a one-to-one of every gigabyte of sound that is inside of this software. For the really picky people, software is still where it's at. But there's a massive group of people that just want to sit down and play drums. If you just want to sit down and play drums, then I would buy this drum set with one of the Roland modules that I talked about earlier, because you're going to get a very good sounding drum set with the V71, and you're going to get all the benefits of using a module. And you can still keep the software in your back pocket. You know, if you ever want to learn how to use it, utilize all the cool features and flexibility that it has, you still have that as an option. I would like to be able to update the pads within the module though. That's something that is not currently possible. Even inside of the V71, which is connected to the internet, as of right now, there is no way to update the pads from the V71 or the TD27 or the TD50X. Now, pulling back from this drum set specifically and trying to think long term, where is DWE evolving into and where would we like to see it go in the future? The low-hanging fruit is that for their rubber cymbals, they need to have wireless tech built into the rubber cymbals. The transmitters are a great idea. We need it as an option, especially to retrofit current drum sets or to use in unique situations, like giving you a wireless snare to run around with on stage if you plug it into an SPSX or something. But they need to build the wireless tech into the rubber cymbals, and they need to give you the flagship cymbals in the baseline version of the kit. I don't think anybody considers this stuff to be a forever solution to this sort of thing. Something else that doesn't really get a ton of conversation though, is that DWE could get a bunch of eyeballs on their business if they just offered a drum module. They could recreate something like what the Pearl Mimic Pro is doing, or did because they discontinued it. Take a box that has a screen and a ton of inputs and outputs on the back and put really nice drum software on the inside. That's what Pearl did. They created the box, they put Steven Slate Drums 5 inside of the box, and they had one of the best drum modules in the whole world. If DW did that, instantly, they would get more people buying their stuff. And then of course, the other easy low-hanging fruit is why not create a PDP-E kind of drum set, or just something that doesn't have the super high-end shells so you can bring the price down to $5,000. If they can create a version of this that has the same triggering technology, the same guts, but inside of cheaper shells, that would also get a bunch of attention. Because as we know, anytime you sell a drum set for this kind of price, it's going to have a niche audience because of the pricing you chose. But anyway, going back to this drum set, because this video is about today, not tomorrow, the big question, the big expensive question is, who is this drum set for specifically? Who's like the ideal customer? I would say the kind of person that would like this and pull them away from buying a Roland V8716 or an F-Note 707 or a custom-built drum set would probably still be the wireless nature of it. That's like the core identity of DWE. What truly makes this different from everything else? It's a handful of features. Wireless, it's got pitch bending and palm muting on the toms. You can use it with metal or rubber cymbals. You can use it with a module or the software. And it's a dual high-end acoustic drum set and a high-end electronic drum set. So put it all together, that has a bunch of hooks that might get potential customers. I would say that DW doesn't really win on paper, but it still is offering something different. And there's a lot of potential for them to one-up themselves in the coming years, because this is still a new department within a company that primarily does acoustic drums. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.